Welcome everybody to today's webinar. Today's webinar is Biosimilars, Death or Financial Burden. As you know, this is a part of our Uncommon Conversations webinar series, and we're really excited to have Hazel Gorham here today to present this webinar. So without further ado, I will transition everything over to you, Hazel.
Thank you. My name's Hazel Gorham. I've worked with my passion, which is biosimilars now for at least 8 years, working across all the different phases from phase 1 to 3 to 4. And I've had various roles in project management and looking at biosimilars in even early phase development. And as I said, this really is my passion, and I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you about this topic. And the aim of this talk, this webinar, is, as the title suggests, biosimilars, death or financial burden. And it's generally looking at the US because the positioning of biosimilars and how biosimilars are being approved and the rate of them going to market really is an important factor of a consideration of biosimilar development in the United States. So the areas I'm going to cover, first of all, I'm going to look at the current state of biosimilars, just to give you some kind of baseline and looking globally where we are with the regulatory guidances within the EU. Very quickly, just mentioning the rest of the world because the focus is the EU and the United States. Then look at the challenges for biosimilars, the focus being on the US, the benefits, the great benefits from biosimilars coming to market, and then how we can help you, how Worldwide can help you. So just to give you that kind of outlook, that global outlook, in Europe, biosimilars have been around for quite some time now. The legal pathway was initiated in 2001 and then updated in 2004. We have a number of guidelines in Europe. We have the overarching guidelines, and then we have the molecule-specific ones, which give you specific guidance depending on the molecules. And these can be from interferons to heparins, etc. And then we have some general overarching guidelines, again, which don't necessarily differentiate between biologics and biosimilars. For example, those ones that are relating to kind of immunogenicity. And Europe, as I say, has been involved in biosimilars for a number of years. The concept and development, we were one of the first regions to develop the guidance documents for these products. And now we have up to 63 products approved, ranging over 14 different reference products, and we're quite prolific in Europe, and we have now 4 under review in May 2019. And this may be in some contrast to the United States. They put in a regulatory pathway, the PPACA, and this set in the new pathway for we call the 351K, and that only became in place into law in 2010. So this is almost a decade later than within Europe. And it's a slightly different approach in the US, in the sense of it's 2 steps. You can prove biosimilarity, so you have a biosimilar, and then there seems to be this next step, which is an interchangeable product. And this came about, as I say, in 2012. These guidelines were put out there. And since then, we've had several revisions. Indeed, within May this past month, we've had the finalised version of the interchangeability guidelines, which I'll be referring to later, and the comparability analytical guideline, another draft version, has been put out. So within the FDA, these really are evolving guidelines, though that there are final guidelines in various aspects. But I think what it's interesting to see is the number of biosimilars that have been licensed. We're talking 19 in comparison to the 63 within Europe. and to date, only 5 have made it to market, as far as I'm aware. 2 filgrastins, 2 infliximabs, and 1 pegfilgrastin. I haven't included the insulins. There are 2 insulin products, but they're not biosimilars. They've been approved under a different pathway, and insulins are going to be moved over to the biosimilar pathway within, the kind of near future, and that's under discussion with the FDA how this is going to finally be achieved. So what are the challenges and the hurdles in the United States? Well, there are quite a few, and I'm going to be discussing these in more detail, but just to give you kind of a top level idea, why is the US lagging behind? One is potentially the US legislation itself. It is quite complex, and I'll go on to show you where some of the potential problems have come about. There's naming conventions. Again, this has added a layer of complexity. It's something we don't do in Europe, and this has caused some kind of issues. Education, as I said, the US has come on board later than in Europe, and so the prescribers themselves, the physicians, are so not used to the concept of biosimilars, and this can also cause problems with the interchangeability. This kind of maybe potential concept that there's 2 levels of biosimilarity. There's biosimilar, which you can't automatically substitute, and then you have the interchangeable. So it's bringing this kind of 2-tier system. So again, there's quite some complexity there. Then we come to the deals that are being struck between the originator companies and the biosimilar developers themselves, and the market dynamics, which is hindering the penetration of biosimilars into the US marketplace. So one of the first topic I'm going to consider is what's become called the patent dance, and it's about the legislation and the approval process for biosimilars in the US. In the process itself, there is a kind of companies get to exchange information. So when the product's been developed, and they finally come to filing, this information is exchanged, and the idea is to allow companies to settle any patent disputes before launch, and hopefully make it easier for the manufacturers. But unfortunately, this hasn't necessarily become the case, and there's been quite a few litigation issues. The first kind of litigations was actually about the process itself, with companies kind of having this dance around the actual process, from kind of who should reveal and what timings should be put in place. So, for example, Amgen and Sandoz will basically put the question to the court as to whether they had to do this exchange of information. The case was it actually optional or not, and this caused some angst, and there was various discussions while this was actually kind of resolved, and the court upheld and said that it actually was an optional process. Then we came into place and we started the kind of procedural litigations around when does the clock start with regard to the actual 180-day notice period after approval. So there was this kind of discussion and debate about, as I say, the clock starting before or after approval, which then meant that the originator companies then had an extended period of time if it came after the approval, or whether it could be done earlier prior to approval. So again, it was all tactics about how potentially to delay kind of products coming to market. And then we came to the actual kind of patent disputes itself, and hence the term patent dance. This came more down to the actual kind of manufacturing patents. For example, you've got the cell cultural manufacturing litigation, and that came under for the Sandoz. They had up to 24 alleged infringements of their patents, and again, this can still be ongoing for a number of years and takes a long time to resolve. And by doing this, you're delaying launch and you're tying up companies with legal fees and within the legal system, and it's the developers who have to bear that legal cost. And with that, you can be putting off biosimilar developers. You can have, we've had clients who said they don't necessarily want to go to the US because they don't want to necessarily take on board the cost of potential litigation. So these are all kind of issues that can kind of put off developers going to the US. Another one is the issue with regard to getting access to the originator products. So you can start undertaking the analytical comparability exercise, and even for clinical supplies for the originator product, for the reference product, when undertaking your clinical studies. And this is due to what we call the risk evaluation mitigation strategy, where there is sometimes limitation of the drug supplies, but the originator companies are kind of hiding behind this and saying, oh, we can't release large supplies of our product. And the FDA are aware of this, and indeed the FDA have commented and said that actually this is anti-competitive behaviour, and have had released very strong wording around this matter, saying that they would step in if necessary if they identified this kind of potential hindrance to biosimilar developers. So what about the deals? Well, again, this is kind of a really kind of a game that's been played with the developers. There's a number of companies have struck deals again around the patents where it's delaying the launch of products. So for example, with the adalimumab, AbbVie have undertaken a number of deals with a number of companies. Now the latest being with Boehringer actually in the past couple of days, where they've agreed to kind of stall the litigation, or stop the litigations as long as the biosimilar developer is not launching their product until 2023. While in Europe, the biosimilar product is available, in the US, there's a delay of launch. And this really, does not help the biosimilar market, and it keeps those prices elevated in the US. And again, just it's not helping kind of biosimilars, penetration of biosimilars into the US marketplace. Now, I kind of mentioned earlier about interchangeability. Now, interchangeability or proving interchangeability, it's in the law. It is an actual requirement. You don't have automatic interchangeability with an approval of a biosimilar product. As I said, it's come about in a kind of two-step process where you can first have approval for your product being a biosimilar, but then you can either do it in parallel or you can do additional studies to prove a product for interchangeability for automatic substitution. And as I said, it kind of gives this idea that biosimilars are inferior to those demonstrating interchangeability. To date, I'm not aware of any product that's been launched or approved for interchangeability. And this whole concept produces extra burden on the developers and extends the timelines and the cost to the developers for additional studies. And indeed, actually, the guidance has only been finalised in May, and still requires the same type of studies. So it's given some more clarification about what is required and some options on a molecule by molecule basis, but it still requires proof of interchangeability, and that cost associated with it can really be kind of a detrimental to biosimilar developers. Now, we don't have this same problem within Europe. It's not mandated, and it's down very much to the individual kind of countries as to how interchangeability is handled. Biosimilar switching it is, as I say, varies across Europe and is down to pricing and tender negotiations and policymakers. And there's definitely seen a trend between a real market-driven pricing competitiveness. So basically, you get this switching backwards and forwards depending on, the price, the best value for money. There is no, shall we say, necessary loyalty to the originator products. And I mean, this interchangeability is not really a new concept. Patients change between different biologics to different products, but we have this issue, this conceptual problem about changing from one biosimilar product to the originator product, or even biosimilar to biosimilar product, even though they've been shown to be biosimilar, and they have the approval. So this really is something that needs to be kind of played out, and discussions are still ongoing. For example, there's been discussions very recently about insulin, and as I say, the insulins are moving over to the biosimilar kind of pathway for approval, and how are we going to deal with that interchangeability of kind of patients moving from different types of insulin, which they do anyway, but between biosimilar products. How is the US going to cope with this? We don't know. I mean, the interchangeable products in Europe have been around for 12 years, and we've not seen any safety concerns to date. So that is going to be, something that needs to be played out in the US. So naming. Naming is yet another kind of problem area, or more a barrier within the US. The FDA guidance released in 2015 required a 4-letter suffix to be in front of each biosimilar product. And this in itself, they felt would be of advantage when tracing biosimilar products and being able to follow it back, because the conceptual problem was that they felt that biosimilars would be harder to trace because they will have this kind of same monoclonal antibody name. But there's not, again, this system is not in place within Europe, and other countries tried introducing similar schemes. Australia introduced a similar system, but then dropped it because they felt it was just too complex. It didn't work. The WHO, the WHO, they again introduced a system, but it was very complex, and again, this was dropped. So it's brought in maybe a system that, well, for years has not been required in Europe, but again, whether this contributes to the complexity of biosimilars, and again causes more confusion with the prescribers, and contributes to lack of confidence, it is to be determined. But there is no conceptual need for the 4-letter suffix within Europe. So again, another level of difficulty for the US. Then I say about the lack of education. Actually, it's really no different than potentially where we were in Europe 10 years ago. It's just familiarity with biosimilars. I will be going on to say how the FDA are trying to address this, but the fact is that recent surveys of physicians said less half of physicians believe that biosimilars would be a safe as the originator products in both treatment naive and existing patients, and only 1/3 believe that a biosimilar would be less safe than the reference product. So it is difficult. We've got barriers relating to stakeholders, education, awareness, and lack of information. And to be honest, if the prescribers are not familiar with biosimilars, why would the patients have confidence in biosimilar products? So there is a lot of education that needs to be done and familiarization. And as I said, this was where we were within Europe, but now Europe has embraced the products, and we definitely see that uptake in Europe. With regards to the products, it's down now to pricing rather than kind of fear of these products. So talking about the market dynamics, the US system, the cost payer system, is extremely complicated, and it can allow big pharma to start, to block competition. It's not the same as in Europe, and it's certainly shown to be a big hindrance, for biosimilars market penetration. Now, competition is good. We want competition, and that will hopefully drive down the price. But if you have it that whenever a biosimilar comes in, the originator company comes in and undercuts, or what they do is they can wrap their products together in a bundle. So can say you can only have this bundle at this price, reduced pricing, if you include these many drugs. This is really, in a way, kind of anti-competitive. Yes, I was talking about it in the EU. We have the tendering systems, and this has helped drive down the price. But we have to have a system in place where everybody can have, I'd say, like a slice of the cake. Because if you eliminate the competition, the kind of originators can, over in a couple of years, then build their prices back up. So it has to become more kind of a sharing of the marketplace. So biosimilars have their place. They bring in that competition, but it has to be that everybody can live in that marketplace. Otherwise, it will just become a process of elimination. The bigger players eliminating kind of the smaller developers coming in and trying to penetrate that marketplace. So this can again lead to an area of litigation. We've got J&J versus Pfizer over Pfizer's version of Remicade, and these lawsuits are holding back on the uptake of biosimilars. So what is the FDA doing to support biosimilar developers and the concept of biosimilars, and is the tide turning? Well, the former commissioner of the FDA put in particular emphasis on biosimilars and how it could help support biosimilar development. And this has been taken up by the acting FDA commissioner now, Ned Sharpless. And there's been a number of kind of talks and press releases on the importance of biosimilars. And the FDA are now really stepping up on information and education around biosimilars. They're simplifying the process to prove interchangeability and extrapolation across the indications. Though I say the interchangeability, I still believe it is going to be a real challenge. And we didn't see much flexibility within the released final guidance. So, I think there's going to be some very much ongoing discussions with the FDA about the interchangeability. In July in 2018, they released a biosimilars action plan that outlined a number of key actions to promote development. As I say, there's been the Supreme ruling with Amgen versus Sandoz, and the ruling was followed by the kind of Federal Circuit holding the state laws were preempted, and a further win for biosimilar manufacturers. Now, bringing back to kind of probably the title of this webinar, which was Death or Financial Burden, I want to talk about the need for a better healthcare. As I said, we only have 19 biosimilars approved and only 5 launched in the United States. the United States really is falling behind other countries in the launching and the actual uptake of biosimilars. And developers are being put off with coming to the US, as they due to the costs, etc. And I'm passionate to say that lives are being lost. People are going bankrupt due to the costs of their personal medicine, and there's lack of competition in the marketplace. So something really needs to happen to move this forward, and this really is, an actual case. This Alex Smith, he died at 26 years of age because he couldn't afford his insulin in America. How his issues are detailed in the slide. He tried to reduce down the amount of insulin he was used. He couldn't get the insurance, and he died a month later. And I think this case really, if anything can come out of this, this really kind of kick-started some discussions within the US about the need for insulins, the insulins costing and access, etc. And indeed, the FDA recently had an open discussion, an open forum on about kind of insulins and the need and access, and the biosimilar developers were able to talk of this along with kind of patient support groups, etc. How we really need to, or how the US needs to get a handle on insulin prices. I say that people are going bankrupt. Medical bills are the biggest cause for bankruptcy, according to the US. And sadly, people are just not getting access to the drugs they need. And really, it's important to developers to be supported to get their products out on the market, from strategic planning to timing to cost. And we really need to have that concept of the FDA to carry on pushing and get the biosimilar development on track and get the products launched as well. So we have the products coming through for approval, but there needs to be that push for actual products to get launched to market, and necessarily stopping the kind of the deals behind products. So United States, as I say, is falling behind other countries in uptake. There's caution. It's a hostile environment. The US is into, it's kind of the tortoise and the hare compared to Europe. I'm not saying that Europe doesn't have its challenges. It certainly does. But the American regulators and the policymakers have to kind of streamline the approach. And this is a big task. Biosimilars, are too valuable to ignore. In the Europe, we do see that market penetration, and we do see some of the costs coming down. As I said, maybe that's a kind of simplistic view, but it does. It saves money for the healthcare systems and personally to individual people, but to the healthcare systems. And then this in itself means more patients get treated. You increase access, and potentially patients then might well get treated earlier on these medications, especially the biologics, and giving more options. So biologics are really life-changing, and if it means that more people get treated, or they can necessarily be treated earlier, then then biosimilars are really making that change to people. Here's a case study where we've seen the launch of the GCFS. And you can see that increase of the long-acting has stayed kind of the steady, but the short-acting, where we had the biosimilar approval, you've got that more rapid takeoff in launching of product and the number of units that are being used. So we can say that really, more patients are getting treated because there's kind of more usage of the product. So the cost impact of biosimilars in rheumatology. the budget from switching patients from biosimilar infliximab for 5 years. You can see the costing there for the UK. And again, there's been big drives in the UK recently. They were quite complacent, but now the NHS itself has woken up, and we've got numbers of meetings and forums where now they are really pushing for the biosimilars and they've woken up to the fact that biosimilars can substantially save money for the NHS, and this is not just within the UK, but it's where I'm based. So, but we see that across, numbers of countries with biosimilars to etanercept in the UK, France, Germany, Spain, and you can see the savings made. And this can equal to, as I say, additional patients being treated. I am very proud to have worked on biosimilars over these past 8 years, and to see the development and the market penetration of biosimilars. When I first started, it was really hard to get these products in, and I was involved in some of the kind of first products, and I think it's just amazing to see how these products are now saving the various health authorities the money and enabling more patients to be treated. So what do we need? Well, we need better kind of harmonization and regulation. We're definitely getting there, but I've been saying that over a number of years now. But we need kind of better cooperation between the EM and FDA. You can have this on request, but we need to have that kind of uniformity of approach. And maybe for kind of the developing countries, for where they're licensing in products, they don't necessarily have to have the same kind of stringency because they're bringing in those products. We need to able to ensure that those kind of developing regions can still have access to the drugs. So there has to be better kind of collaboration across all regions with to support biosimilars development and to get these products to the patients. So how can Worldwide support you? Worldwide, we have that passion for biosimilar development. We have been involved in a number of biosimilar product development. We have a team that is flexible and can help you with your global development of product, and we understand that need to get the product out to market as soon as possible with the best value for money for your clinical development programs. And with that, I hope you've enjoyed this webinar, and I'll pass back to Jackie.
Thank you so much, Hazel. Really appreciate every piece of information that you shared today. I think this was a very educational webinar, and if anybody has any questions after watching this webinar, we encourage you to reach out to Hazel using the email on your screen. We also encourage you to visit worldwide.com. You can get more information there about how to reach us about your biosimilar program if you'd like to learn more information about how Worldwide can help you. So with that, thank you everybody for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.